So I hope that you'll excuse me for reading from dot points, but I have word finding problems and memory issues. So if I nod off at any point during this presentation, can someone just give us a nudge? But we're all generous in accepting people here, aren't we? So I think it's not going to be a problem. I want to start off. Where is it? Here it is. I want to start off with an acknowledgement that we're all in this together. We're all the same, and I want us all to begin the journey and continue on as part of the same expedition, if you like. And this expedition is life. We're not heroes or failures. We're not insignificant. We're all as important as each other and to each other. So we're going to do away with labels and all pull together. We're going to learn what we can from what we have and each other. I mean, we all love mountains, that's why we're here, right? Even non-climbers can appreciate wild nature. But I want to put it to you that our love of mountains has resulted in a shared learning that is significant to every one of us individually, even though we're on the same team. So I want to share a little bit of my own story, some of the lessons that I've learned from the mountains and how these lessons have helped me survive, adjust and thrive in a radically different life. So to begin, some of you may know my story and some of you may be in it, and others might recognise friends. But I grew up on the moors like a Lancashire Jane Eyre. And my childhood home backed onto the West Pennines, was almost directly above a disused quarry called Wilton Quarry above Bolton. And this quarry supplied the stone that lined the reservoirs that powered the Industrial Revolution, which had its birth just down the road. This was early 1980s, Thatcher's Britain, and the economic and social hopelessness of the time, along with my parents' divorce, contributed to some adolescent angst, shall we say. And I burned the moors, I threw petrol bombs at climbers, I shoplifted, I threw myself down a 3-storey stairwell at school. Although I used to spend hours watching the climbers and mucking about in those quarries. But it wasn't until a teacher called Harold Woolley took me and some other delinquents climbing that I discovered that I was really good at something for the first time in my life. I mean, I loved climbing, and you could say that it was my first love. So when my mum gave me some money from the divorce settlement, at 16 I took myself off to Verdon Gorge in France for some months until the money ran out. And you know, it was marvellous, transformative climbing. And I seemed to transform myself into Limahl, the never-ending story singer. What's that going on? But I also realised I was a natural at sleeping in skips and eating out of bins and dressing in rags. And all this cemented my resolve to be a dirtbag climber of magnificent proportions. This is where I began to build my own fashion style, derelict. But where could I build on this heady mix of poor hygiene and adrenaline? On no money and with little education? Where could I find others who were on a similar quest for hedonism at high altitude? Who could match my special talent for climbing on a diet of chip butties and meagre sleep? Well, I found a whole town of folk that could best me in each of these criteria. I'm surrounded by wonderful mountains. So at 17, I decided to chuck in the carpentry apprenticeship that my mum had worked so hard to get me, and I moved to Llanberis in Wales. Now, although this decision looked insane at the time, it proved to be the best thing that I could ever have done. I found a whole community of people whose love for mountains came before all else. And I was able to devote myself to climbing, and there was never any shortage of new routes or friends to explore them with. We were doing something new, and we felt like what we did mattered. And I was beginning to see that I was valued amongst my peers at least. And so that I mattered, and with this I began to find my voice, and I began to explore the world, but I also began to write. Now, here's some footage of Storn Ullerdale on the Isle of Harris, where I climbed 3 magnificent climbs with Johnny Dawes and Ben Moon. But this is in 1988. It's shot by Alan Hughes. I couldn't drive a car, and so Johnny had to drive me everywhere. And now that I'm disabled, my friend Ben here, he has to drive me everywhere as well on this tour. Anyway, I wrote for High magazine and On the Edge and several other publications regularly. And eventually I compiled the articles into my first book, Deep Play. And in 1998, this won the Boardman Tasker Award. And with the cash, I booked a round the world climbing trip with my then partner, Celia Bull. Here she is climbing at Rheged. I'm just going to have a sip. So the itinerary went a bit like this. It went Malaysia and Kinabalu, and then Australia, where we were going to climb at Rehabilitation and the Totem Pole, then to Canada and the Bugaboos, then up to Alaska, where we were going to do a new climb on the Devil's Thumb, and then back home to Wales. Well, we climbed Kinabalu. This is a picture of Celia there. And then we made it to Australia, but it was hideously hot. And so we decided to head down to this island at the very bottom of the world called Tasmania, and where we had seen a double-page spread in High magazine, I think, of the Totem Pole, and just thought, wow, this just looks amazing. It's 4 meters wide and 65 meters high. It's so slender that it sways slightly when you stood on top of it. But in 1998, I acquired a devastating brain injury when a rock the dimensions of a laptop computer scythed into my skull, from falling from 25 meters. Now, some of you might know my Totem Pole story, but for those who haven't heard it, I'll just briefly retell it. For the story that Celia and I share is quite extraordinary. So Celia and I were attempting a free ascent of the Totem Pole and it was really quite remote back then. But this ledge here, the halfway ledge, is intrinsic to our story, so pay attention to that. Now, I was a metre above the sea when the rock hit me. Although I knew nothing of it, I came around upside down, blood pouring into the sea. And then I must have passed out for a minute, for a while. Next time that I came around, Celia was by me. She'd abseiled down from the ledge and she got me upright in slings. She put her helmet on my head and then she disappeared back up the rope to the halfway ledge again. It then took her 3 hours to haul me 30 metres. Absolutely amazing effort. A bit like hauling a body up a block of flats, you know, kind of. When she got me there, her hands were bleeding. She then had to extricate herself off the totem pole, climb a portion of these cliffs opposite, and then run 7 kilometres for help to the nearest phone, because it was in the days before mobile phones. And there's only me and her down there. It was quite wild. 10 hours later, after that rock had fallen on my head, I heard the sound of helicopter rotor blades on the wind. And Neil Smith, the paramedic, abseiled down to me. He thought that he was in for a simple corpse recovery, judging by the amount of blood on the ledge. And when he saw that I was still alive, he knew there was no time to lose, and so he clipped me to his harness, he put a neck brace on me, he threw me over the edge, and abseiled down with me into a waiting boat, except that the boat, or the tinny as they called in Australia, was going up and down on the swell by 6 feet or 2 meters, and so on the upsurge he cut the rope and we both fell into the boat. It's quite exciting, really. So after 6 weeks in the Royal Hobart Hospital, I was deemed stable enough to be medevaced back to the UK, where I began a year in a Liverpool hospital, although I made the mistake of saying Liverpool at one show the other day, and someone's corrected me and said that it wasn't Liverpool, it was the Wirral. So, a Wirral hospital. So now I was epileptic, hemiplegic, aphasic and agnosic. Don't worry if you don't know the meaning of these words, I didn't at the time either, but basically I was paralysed down one side, unable to talk for many months, unable to tell people's faces apart. That's facial agnosia. That's a right hemisphere brain injury, and I had a rock on the left hemisphere. That's why my right side is wiped out. But the swelling on the right meant that meant that I had this facial agnosia for a good while. Even now, 25 years later, I still, if there's people that look vaguely similar, I will get them confused. I was unable to recall the most simple facts, but paradoxically, I was just as intelligent as I ever was, which wasn't very. But it was a bit like being a baby again. Now, I often call the accident the best thing that has ever happened to me because it taught me so much. But now I realise that this seems woefully inadequate to describe the gravitas of what I went through. And when I distilled it down, I saw that we all go through something like this at some point in our lives. So, in a sense, I'm reporting back from the other side. Now, after many months, I walked 100 metres around the rehab centre. And I thought, I can work with this, I can build on it. If I can do this, then if I try really, really hard, I might be able to, claw back some tiny semblance of this exciting climber's life that I'd led before. And so I slowly got back to the hills again. This is the hills around Clanbarris on my weekend leave from rehab. And it was great to get back to the mountains again and to be with my friends, in the fresh air, in the throes of life. Just magnificent to be alive. Now, this is my first post-accident expedition to Morocco to climb Jebel Toubkal. This is what it looked like. So this is some months after my release from rehab. Now, this was not an easy climb for me, and so I didn't make it up that mountain, not because of my new disabling condition, but because of my stubborn dedication to poor hygiene. I was completely undone by a cheese sandwich purchased at a train station with complimentary flies hanging off it. I know most people wouldn't buy a sandwich black with flies, but I'm known to be a risk taker. And besides, it fitted with my derelict lifestyle. But anyway, that trip was marvellous and hard and grotty, effortful, just perfect. And then I was off. Despite of or because of that cheese sandwich, I planned new expeditions climbing 1,000 metres higher each time. This is on the summit of Point Lenana on Mount Kenya. And this is my first all abilities climb we climbed Kilimanjaro. I'll just point out the people. So this is Pete Steen, who fell off and broke his back, and he's a partial paraplegic. Underneath those gaiters he has kind of chopsticks for legs. And next to him is, you probably recognise Jamie Andrew from Scotland, and he is a quadruple amputee after being stormed in on the north face of the Douats above Chamonix for a week, and so he got absolutely atrocious frostbite. And next to him is David Lim, who he was fresh back from the first Singaporean ascent of Everest, when he came back to Singapore, thought he had a cold, and he went to bed. And when he woke up, he was completely paralysed with Guillain-Barré syndrome and had to be intubated. And I'm just a bog standard hemiplegic. I met the future mother of my kids in the Royal Hobart Hospital, and she was a nurse that looked after me. And so I ended up moving to Tasmania. That's how I moved there. So this is what a bushwalk in Tasmania looks like. And this is what a footpath in Tasmania looks like. And I also found trike packing, and so I discovered trike packing, and this is on the road to Mount Everest after 26 days from Lhasa down over the Himalayas to Kathmandu, and that was with another disabled person. And after 18 years, 18 years after my accident, I felt ready to tackle the totem pole again. And so this is a few of the folk that helped me carry water and climbing equipment, filming equipment, and camping equipment to the end of Cape Hoy. And this is the moment when that germ of an idea to write this book was kind of planted in my head. It was just me and Steve Monks who made the first free ascent of the Totem Pole on the summit 18 years after my life-changing accident. It was the end of a long journey, but also the beginning. And I realised that sometimes we have to finish something to begin again. And closing this 18-year loop gave me a unique perspective. When I got to the summit, I couldn't work out a way to get actually onto the summit. The only thing that I could see what to do was to just fall on my face and just face plant onto his bare foot. So it looks like I'm kissing his feet. And then I'm just kind of there, kind of lying on my face on the summit, but with my legs still stuck out over the void. What? You've not washed your feet, have you? Did you hear that? I said, you've not washed your feet, have you? Now, I sincerely feel I've come out of the other side of this not just better for it, but with a whole new philosophy on life and death. I've had to do some deep digging. I've settled into my own spot. So the rest of this talk will really focus on how this life, engaging with the mountains, deeply informs the way I live as an adventurer, an immigrant, a father, a partner, a writer, a person with a disability, a human. So here's a couple of more slides to illustrate some of my recent life. This was an all-disabled expedition which cycled from the lowest point in Australia, Katitanda, to the highest point in Australia, which is Targangil or Mount Kosciuszko. Took 43 days, was over 2,500 kilometres. To be the first to cycle from the lowest point in Australia to the highest point in Australia, 2,000 kilometres away. I don't know whether we're going to do it or not though.
The tandem got driven into an underpass, broken in a number of places. And that was before we'd even started riding.
I fell out at the back of the troopy and had to go to hospital.
My bum's definitely feeling it a bit.
Get that into your belly, old mate.
We're all stopping and starting a lot because we're just not fit yet.
At least 2 of the people are actually quite at risk of dying.
All suffering, a few tears.
He's only ever cycled 12 kilometres and thought that he would have to go to hospital.
Everyone has some form of disability. We've all got different challenges to overcome.
When I'm at home riding my push bike, I am stuffed. Any kind of disability, you think I really can't do it. Once you're here, go bit by bit, you can do it. Look at us.
Disabled people are capable of firsts just like anybody else.
Well, the good bit about the ride is
Wally, he's called Wally. He's got cystic fibrosis and only 38% lung function, and he came with me on this walk as well, which we executed in this past July. It's 237 kilometres across the desert and over huge boulders. This is like a stream bed that we had to walk along for 11 kilometres, climbing over cars basically. And this was west of Alice Springs, along a mountain range called the Pritchard, which is a name of a giant centipede in kind of Dreamtime mythology. Go on, read that. It's pretty funny, isn't it? Yeah. So this is my real passion, and my day job really is I'm a book for the Hobart Human Library. If you ever get a chance to see a human library, it's actually really special. It's a wonderful organisation. I know that it exists in Britain. Here I help tell my story. I tell my story to help break down prejudice and discrimination, stereotyping, not just for people with disabilities, but for, like, there's a whole group of us go into a workplace or school, and it's not just people with disabilities. We also have people with diverse gender, or people of racial diversity, and what are they called? Refugees. Yeah. So and it really works. We've talked to small groups of people, maybe 4, and then they move on to another person of equal diversity, and just being able to meet somebody and talk to somebody and actually ask them questions really means that they're just humans, just like anybody else, aren't they, or aren't we? So it really works. But I also talk about what I've learned from the mountains as well, and so that's what we're going to deep dive into now. But I should preface this by saying that this is what I have learned to be profoundly helpful for me personally, because it might not be the same for you. So, please just take what you think is useful to you and leave the rest in this pretty amazing centre that you've got here. Because as we've seen, you might not agree with a raft of decisions that I made in the 1980s and 90s. And so here are a few more illustrations. I mean, we could spend the rest of this talk dissecting this combination of hair, wool and lycra, couldn't we? I've got a collection of these sweaters throughout the ages. Wendy Lawrence, they're called. And if you ask my partner, yes, I can still put together a deeply surprising and occasionally frightening outfit. I can do a fashion parade later as an optional extra if you want me to. But in those days, if I liked something, I would ask for sponsorship, hence the wool jumpers and the frightening tights, the Tartex mushroom pate. Crucial to every Himalayan expedition, actually. It may sound delicious, but let me tell you, after the 89th tube, it starts to pale. Its earthy mushroom flavour begins to wane. And Golden Virginia for lung expanding at a high altitude. Whilst bivouacking in a blizzard on Maru Shark's Fin, me and Johnny Dawes rolled cigarettes from pages torn out of Virginia Woolf's The Waves. Still my favourite book, by the way. But we just took a little bit of working class Britain and smattered it across the globe. Although I do realise that Virginia Woolf wasn't working class and neither was Johnny. But seriously, the things that I learned from the mountains that I climbed and that I failed to climb, I doubt that I would ever have survived that day on the Totem Pole without, spilling half my blood into the ocean onto that ledge. Without that knowledge gained in the mountains, I mean, just surviving meant that I had to draw on a lifetime of experience alongside something much larger than myself. And I certainly wouldn't have adjusted so well to this radically different life if it wasn't for years spent facing up to a force much greater than me. The mountains are always going to be immovable, aren't they? But at least on a human time scale. And I learned to adjust to whatever they threw at me. But now we're going to have to go right back to the beginning, to where it all started. My learning really began with a holiday to the Scottish mountains when I was about 11 years old. You can see where I got my pioneering fashion sense from, can't you? Thanks, Mum. And here's some more Super 8 footage from that trip. The Witch's Step on the Isle of Arran. This was the first time that I had to commit to anything when the stakes were so high. We got lost, the map blew away, and then we found ourselves committed to an unknown descent of a graded rock climb in foul weather. We weren't climbers and we didn't possess any gear. Thank God we looked great though. But really that trip was very, very significant. I learned the true meaning of freedom. Mum and I found ourselves in a position where we had to climb on. We had no choice. And there's a paradox in this tale because we often equate choice with freedom. But what I found climbing was the very opposite. So you might say that my choice was to be fully committed. And this gave me a freedom beyond my body. I know that's a pretty complicated concept, I think. So here's an example from my book, which is based on a real experience that I had myself. So I'm just going to read from my book for a minute. There's a split in your fingertips. This you observe. Light begins to pour out of these splits. Barely a moment later, light begins to pour out of your mouth, and then your nose, from all the orifices of your body, all the pores of your skin. You are made of light. In this moment, you are incorporated into the universe. All the joy, all the hardship, the yin and yang. You are among the planets dissolved. Who you thought you were, all the labels, son, daughter, sister, brother, husband, wife, activist, partier, determined son of a bitch, they've all utterly dissolved. You are pure consciousness now. There is no space you can imagine that you're not already occupying. You move swiftly, poetically up the final slab, beyond the difficulties, beyond the hardship, beyond the suffering. You are bounding up the rock now. No sooner have you caught a hold than you are past it and onto the next ledge. Your body seems to instinctively know the language of the rock. The rock's music, your body inhabits it. You cannot conceal a grin. You are filled with joy. And as you flow toward the summit, you pause and look down. The whole world is below you. Am I in heaven, you ask yourself? And this is the right question to ask, because at this moment you are in heaven. Or at least the axis mundi, where the heaven meets the earth. At the foot of the ladder to infinity. For you realise, finally, that heaven is on this fissured mountain, and it always has been. And toward the top of the climb, you have a shift in perspective. Though in reality, you knew it all along. You are me, and I am you. There is no I this and I that. There's only here and now. That's all there is. You are not in the process of becoming one with the landscape. You're in the process of the realization that you always were one with the landscape. You are one with the world. You are the universe, and you meld with the mountain. Now, the freedom of knowing this great, living, breathing, whirling world, beyond choice or decision, accepting and responding in the flow of life, is something that I continue to experience frequently through insight meditation. But I relearned this lesson again and again in the mountains. This image of Trango Tower in Pakistan is a good illustration of how the fissure dictates the direction that the climber needs to follow. You can't really move left or right in that position. And so I like to say that the environment provides the condition, and you, the climber, have to provide the response. One might think that that's very constrictive, but if you're in harmony with the rock, you feel incredibly free and alive, don't you? It's a very simple and splendid way to live your life. Pain. Now, these are chapter headings from my book. This is a very special photograph for me. This is a police photo of me on the ledge there and paramedic Neil Smith abseiling down to me there. Or you can also see the tinny that was going to go around and for a lifeboat there. Now, my experience on the totem pole, it taught me to be unwavering in the face of hardship and difficulty. It taught me the importance of total acceptance of the way things are, but in this moment. And the more that we can accept pain, be it physical or emotional, the more we come to understand that it will pass. Nothing is fixed or unchanging, from the pain in our bodies or our minds to our very existence as a physical body, which will sooner or later dissolve back into the earth. And so this is a mind map that I drew at the Banff Centre during a writing residency, and this is where the mountain path was polished, if you like. Fear. This is some footage by the late John Whittle of climbing Lighthouse Arret at South Stack in Gogarth, or on Anglesey or Innismon. And this is a place very close to my heart, and it's where I did some of my most testing climbs. Now, I'm showing you this really because to illustrate how I have limited use of my right leg and no use of my right arm. In fact, my spastic right side seems to actively seek to force me off the rock oftentimes. And sometimes you'll see that I use my head as a third point of contact like that there. Also note the rope above me. It was, at that time I was too scared to lead anything. However, it was in Italy, 11 years post brain injury, that I made my first lead climb. I decided to go to a deeper, more vulnerable place than I had ever been before. I hadn't lost my fear, but I just rationally made this decision. About 5 meters out, I rationally decided, scared stiff, not scared stiff. The outcome's going to be the same. If you're going to fall, you're going to fall. So, what is courageous is not the absence of fear, but the ability to just do it scared. I know that this is a trite and often overused term, but it's true. Just trust that the universe will provide. Later I discovered this to be the essential but often difficult skill of being in the present moment.
Come on, it's okay.
Letting the future go without anticipation. The thing that we desire most in the world is immortality. And the thing that we try and avoid at all costs is death. But in the middle is living. Living's not denying fear, it's sitting with it. acceptance. In Patagonia, I learnt a strange amalgam of determination and patience. While on the wall of the Central Tower of Piney for 21 days, and we endured what felt like apocalyptic storms in a tiny portaledge anchored to the wall by just a 2-inch bolt. At times, the ledge was flying like a kite. And I now know this strange blend of patience and determination to be what some people might call acceptance. That we must all accept that this frail body that we inhabit is going to wither and die. I know it's really happy this talk, isn't it? But once we've accepted this, I mean truly accepted it, I think only then can we begin to live with some degree of certainty. Death. So I believe that the most important moment of our lives is the last one. And what we're doing for the rest of our lives is preparing for that moment. The only other option would be to be afraid of it and not confront impermanence. And I think that we'd all like to exit the world knowing that we did our best. My teacher, Sonam Thakur, would say that exiting is the price of entering. I mean, most people would say that thinking about death all the time is not healthy or abjectly unhealthy. But most of the climbers that I know engage in mindfulness of death practice every day. Sometimes unbeknownst to them, perhaps. But in reality, it's just a brief time that we have in this world. So why not do the things that feel really important to us? Stillness. Now, I feel that there's only a handful of occasions in this life when we feel truly connected. And I now realise I've spent the majority of my life striving for this connection. John Muir said that when we try and pick anything up by itself, that we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. And it's through our constant striving and difficulties that we witness this connection. So I actually think that Sisyphus is happy to keep pushing that boulder up the slope, because to keep striving is enough. And when we go to the mountains, the great cliffs, with our minds fully open, we're one step closer to experiencing reality as it actually is. We're one step closer to the truth of the universe. And so, we're one step closer to transcendence in whatever form that might take. I take it to mean transcending material reality. This is the west face of Mount Asgard, which Ron was talking about earlier. There's a climber, and there's and another one there. And so, as long as I'm moving forward on that path, I'm content to be on this road always, you know, to not ever arrive, because there is no destination. Rebirth. And so with this new perspective, I came to see the Totem Pole as my second birthplace. For all these lessons that I learned from the mountains seemed to coalesce on the Totem Pole and the accident's aftermath. And it felt right and important for me to finish the climb that I'd started almost 2 decades before. And it was a very emotional climb for me. I took the same swing that I took 18 years before that resulted in the rock being flicked off and landing on my head. And I felt the rock scar, you know, the hole in the rock, 25 meters. And that's how I realized that it was the dimensions of a laptop computer. And as I clambered onto that ledge, I swear that I could hear Celia screaming at me. She was nowhere near. She lives on the Isle of Rheged in Scotland. But I swear that I could hear her screaming at me. You're going to have to help me here if we're going to get you out of this. And after 126 one-arm pull-ups up that rope, I finally clambered onto the summit, and an 18-year loop or circle was finally closed. Now, I'm just going to end with some footage from my latest big walk across the Australian desert, whilst reading from my new book. On top of the mountain, you allow yourself to come back into your body. You re-experience your body. However, a tiny piece of the climb will stay with you on the descent. It'll stay with you for the rest of this life. And when you go back to the mountain next time, you'll build on this all-consuming experience, and you'll be able to access this transcendent state more easily. Hermann Hesse wrote, "Every path leads homeward. Every step is birth. Every step is death. And every grave is mother." You realise that you can never get to the top. That there is no summit. And the top does not exist. But home does. And in order to get home, you must first die. Therefore, you surrender yourself to the mountain path. Thank you. That's me.